So I don't even think Oprah Winfrey is a black woman. I think she's a white woman. She's been catering to a demographic of middle-aged white women for a long period of time.
Every time she made a mention to hip hop culture, it was something that was wrong with it. You're looking at it and you're saying that everything that's wrong with our culture is why I'm a success.
Wow.
50 Cent once said, if we can't be friends, then let's be enemies. And when it comes to enemies, nobody does it like 50. His list is endless. From rappers and rivals to some of the most feared gangsters in the streets, this man has gone head to head with them all. Premi couldn't stand him, and yet 50 still walked away on top every single time. It's crazy because most of the people who tried him ended up either 6 feet under behind bars or faded into total irrelevance. That's why when Oprah stepped into the picture, it felt like a heavyweight clash nobody saw coming. Back then, people said she got off easy by just throwing shade because if she had been a man, the outcome might have been a whole different story. 50 wasn't sparing anybody during that era. He was ruthless and people knew better than to poke the bear. But Oprah, she went there anyway. Their feud wasn't some behind-the-scenes drama. It played out for the whole world to see, and it got messier by the year. 50 even took it so far that he straight up questioned her identity, saying Oprah wasn't even really representing as a black woman. At one point, he even said, I don't even think Oprah would face a black, shocking words that had the culture buzzing nonstop. But to really understand why 50 came at Oprah the way he did, you gotta rewind the clock to 2003. That's when Get Rich or Die Trying exploded like a bomb in the culture. An album that didn't just sell, it shattered records, dominated the charts, and made 50 the most talked about rapper alive. His story was already stamped into hip-hop history. A kid out of Jamaica, Queens who lost his mom at a young age, survived the streets, got lit up with 9 bullets, and somehow lived to flip that pain into a multi-million-dollar empire. The world couldn't look away. And for 50, there was one stage bigger than any arena or award show, the Oprah Winfrey Show. That wasn't just a TV couch to him, it was the throne of mainstream America, the ultimate stamp that he had arrived. But it went deeper than fame, way deeper. His grandmother was obsessed with Oprah, a true fan, and in 50's heart, pulling up to that stage wasn't just business, it was personal. He wanted that proud moment, the chance to prove to his family that he made it, that he fought through the streets, dodged death, and turned all that chaos into something positive. But when 50's team tried to line up that dream appearance, Oprah's camp shut it down quick. She wasn't interested, and she didn't sugarcoat it either. She made it crystal clear she wasn't feeling what 50 stood for. In an interview with The Guardian, 50 remembered it word for word. She was completely against everything that was in my music, so she ain't never gonna have me on that show. I'm never going to reach that platform, which is confirmation of you being a huge success. That rejection hit different. See, 50's always played the game with a twisted kind of brilliance. In his book, Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter, he spells it out plain. If we can't be friends, then let's be enemies. And that's not just a catchy line. It's strategy. If you can't stand next to someone as an ally, being their rival can sometimes keep your name in lights even longer. So if Oprah wasn't going to give him that shine as a guest, he was going to flip the script and make himself her problem anyway. And that's exactly what he did, poking at her publicly, keeping his name tied to hers whether she liked it or not. He even told interviewers that her show was made for older white women and that he didn't care about her or her platform one bit. That wasn't just shade, that was war talk and everybody knew it. But 50 didn't just take the rejection and move on. Oh no, he turned it into a running joke. He went so far as to name his dog Oprah and his cat Gail, a not so subtle shot at Oprah's best friend Gayle King. And he didn't stop there, and he even made a Twitter account for the dog, posting wild, sarcastic updates like the pet was throwing shade itself. Only 50 would troll at that level. For years, the feud felt totally one-sided. Oprah played it classy, staying silent, not giving him the satisfaction of a response. But that didn't stop 50. He leaned all the way into his role as the mischievous antagonist, clowning her from the sidelines and keeping his name in headlines just by attaching it to hers. It was slick and messy at the same time, and people couldn't stop watching. Then 2012 came along and the whole dynamic shifted. Gayle King bumped into 50 at a fundraiser and was shocked. He wasn't the loudmouth troublemaker she thought he'd be. Instead, she found him warm, funny, sharp, and surprisingly easy to vibe with. That moment flipped everything. Gayle connected the dots and set up what nobody thought would ever happen: a face-to-face sit-down between 50 Cent and Oprah herself. When 50 finally sat down with Oprah for an episode of Oprah's Next Chapter, he didn't roll up solo. He brought his grandmother with him. That move made the moment deeply personal, almost symbolic, like he was showing her, "Look, I made it. This is what you always wanted to see." For 50, it was the validation he had been chasing for nearly a decade, and his shot to prove to Oprah and the world that behind the bulletproof vest and gangster image stood a sharp businessman with a bigger vision. During the conversation, 50 laid it all out. He admitted the so-called feud was never about true hate, it was strategy. Stirring up controversy was his way to spark conversation, keep his name buzzing, and force his way into cultural spaces that tried to lock him out. Oprah seemed genuinely moved by his honesty, and by the end, the tension melted into mutual respect. For a while, it looked like the storm had passed and the chapter was finally closed, but peace with 50 never lasts forever. By 2019, the heat was back on, and this time it wasn't about TV appearances or playful trolling. The clash between 50 and Oprah reignited over something way bigger and way messier. By 2019, the Me Too movement was dominating every headline, and Oprah threw herself into projects that put a spotlight on misconduct in the entertainment world. One of the biggest was a documentary focused on Russell Simmons, the iconic Def Jam co-founder, who at the time was drowning in accusations of sexual assault. The culture was split, but one of the loudest voices calling foul was none other than 50 Cent. From 50's perspective, Oprah's choices weren't adding up. He saw a pattern. She was shining the brightest light on Black men like Simmons, Michael Jackson, and R. Kelly, while keeping suspiciously quiet about predators from the other side, men like Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein, who were accused of equally horrific crimes. To him, that wasn't just a coincidence, it was a dangerous bias. And 50 being 50, he didn't whisper his opinion. He blasted it all over Instagram. He posted photos of Oprah smiling next to Weinstein, using the receipts to fuel his point and make it impossible to ignore. In the captions, he straight up accused her of going after her own while giving others a pass. He claimed the double standard was glaring and toxic, especially in a system where Black men already face harsher punishment than their white counterparts. To 50, Oprah's focus wasn't just questionable, it was damaging. Not long after 50's explosive post, and after a storm of public backlash, Oprah suddenly pulled out of the Russell Simmons documentary. She insisted her decision had nothing to do with pressure from Russell, 50, or anyone else, but a lot of people weren't buying that explanation. To critics, the timing looked way too convenient, like she folded under the weight of the heat. And here's the kicker, 50 wasn't standing alone on this hill. Over the years, plenty of voices in hip-hop have praised him for saying out loud what they felt for decades. They claimed Oprah always carried a certain dismissive energy toward rap culture, especially when it came to Black men who came from the streets. To them, she was quick to scold rappers, keep them at arm's length, or frame them as negative influences. Yet she'd turn around and give her platform to other figures who were far from squeaky clean, sometimes even outright dangerous. That double standard rubbed people raw. One of the biggest examples fans always bring up, her infamous run-in with Ice Cube and NWA. Instead of acknowledging that Fuck the Police was a raw protest track born out of real police brutality in Black neighborhoods, Oprah zeroed in on the explicit language. She painted the group as part of the problem, reducing their art to nothing more than bad influence music. That framing hit hard and offended a lot of people because to them, it felt like Oprah was ignoring the bigger picture. the pain, the reality, and the truth that rap was putting on record. And then comes the hypocrisy talk, something people never let slide. Critics love to point out how Oprah turned her nose up at rappers, claiming their music pushed violence, misogyny, and negativity. But at the same time, she welcomed guests on her show who carried way darker baggage. People with criminal allegations, messy scandals, and ugly pasts that made certain rappers look like saints in comparison. That double standard became a stain on her image, at least in the eyes of hip-hop fans who felt disrespected by her choices. Still, even with all the shots fired, the 50 verses, Oprah saga has always been viewed as lightweight compared to the other wars 50's been in. And honestly, that might be for two reasons. One, because Oprah's a woman, and two, because 50 had a soft spot thanks to his grandmother being such a huge Oprah supporter. Deep down, he wasn't trying to scorch her the way he's burned his true enemies. Because let's be real, when 50 actually decides to destroy somebody, it gets ugly fast. Case in point, 50 Cent verses. Jimmy Henchman. This wasn't about diss tracks or petty Instagram trolling. This was one of 50's most dangerous feuds, a deadly beef that went way beyond music. This beef wasn't just rap drama. Wait, it was blood in the streets. We're talking shootings, violent run-ins, and even the murder of someone close to 50. By the time the dust settled, Jimmy Henchman wasn't just another rival. He was sitting on a second life sentence. That's how deep this feud cut. Back in the early 2000s, Henchman was a certified power broker in the music industry. He wasn't just managing artists, he controlled major moves. One of his biggest clients, The Game, and at that time, Game was the hottest rookie in the game, fresh off signing with Dr. Dre. Dre wasted no time linking him up with 50 Cent. On paper, it was unstoppable. 50 and G-Unit already had the charts on lock, and Dre's cosign gave Game instant credibility. For a brief moment, it looked like they were about to take over the rap world together, no competition in sight. But as always in hip-hop history, peace doesn't last long. According to Henchman, 50 started getting salty once Game's solo career began skyrocketing. Game wasn't playing the loyal G-Unit soldier role. He was building his own brand, his own empire, and that rubbed 50 the wrong way. The final nail in the coffin? Game started rolling with people that 50 considered his enemies. To 50, that wasn't just disrespect, that was betrayal. And betrayal in his world always comes with consequences. 50 booted Game out of G-Unit, and just like that, one of the most notorious beefs in hip-hop history was born. What followed was straight-up chaos. Diss tracks, non-stop disrespect, and that infamous New York shootout that had the whole industry watching. But what most people didn't realize was that behind all the public fireworks, there was a darker and way more personal war brewing between 50 and Jimmy Henchman. The breaking point came in 2007, and it had nothing to do with records or money. It was personal. Tony Yayo, 50's right-hand man, and G-Unit associate Lodi Mack crossed paths with Henchman's teenage son, known as Little Henchman. Reports say the kid was rocking a G-Unit shirt, a direct shot at 50's crew. To Yayo and Lodi, that was pure disrespect. But what happened next crossed a dangerous line. Things escalated on the spot. The teen was pressed against the wall, and Yayo allegedly smacked him while Lodi Mack went even further, pulling a gun and pistol whipping him. The whole thing shocked people, not just because it was violent, but because it involved someone's child. In the streets, that kind of move doesn't get forgotten. It guarantees retaliation. And from that moment, the beef with Henchman turned into something way more deadly. And that's just how it went down, mate. Both Tony Yayo and Lodi Mack got arrested, but the fallout hit them differently. Yayo managed to get his charges dropped while Lodi pleaded guilty to aggravated assault and ended up doing time behind bars. But if anyone thought that was the end of it, they didn't know Jimmy Henchman. He wasn't about to let something like that slide. Not long after, shots rang out at Yayo's mother's house. Nobody got hurt, but in the streets, everyone knew exactly what that meant. Henchman had sent a message loud and clear. Later that same year, things almost turned fatal. While 50 was shooting the video for I'll Still Kill with Akon, Henchman's crew allegedly pulled up strapped with silencers, ready to make a move. But fate twisted the outcome. One of their guns accidentally went off inside the car, and the sound blew their cover. Panic hit, and they sped off before they could even step out. If that weapon hadn't misfired, the streets believe it would have been a massacre. 50's crew was armed too, so a shootout was practically guaranteed. That one mistake might have been the only reason nobody lost their life that day, but what it did prove, without a doubt, was how far Henchman was willing to go to settle this war. And the madness was only just beginning. Jimmy Henchman brought the war straight to Tony Yayo and 50 Cent's doorstep, literally. One time, Jimmy was cruising down Manhattan's West Side Highway when he casually took one hand off the wheel and reached for his gun. As he rolled past 50's building, he was ready to start firing, but fate got in the way. Cops were trailing him, forcing him to hold back. That botched hit didn't stop him though. If anything, it only made him more reckless. Henchman started getting darker, saying more twisted, and with his plans, he knew 50's rides were bulletproof, so he cooked up a wild idea: blow up 50's van. An explosion in his mind might have been the only way to touch him. That's how far this beef had spiraled. We're not talking disc records anymore. We're talking movie script levels of madness. And it didn't end there. His last attempt on Yayo's life came when he spotted Yayo's Bentley and lit it up with bullets, thinking he had him cornered. But the twist? Yayo wasn't even inside. He was chilling safe in his bulletproof van, parked right behind the Bentley, and walked away without a scratch. What Henchman thought was a hit ended up being yet another miss, but it showed just how obsessed he had become with taking 50's crew down. 4 or 5 bullets tore through the night, and whispers started flying that Henchman might have even had a hand in 50's house burning down. Nothing was ever proven, but by then the war was so toxic that people believed anything. Both camps wanted blood, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before someone paid the ultimate price. That breaking point came in 2009. Lodi Mack, the G-Unit affiliate who years earlier had been caught up in the incident with Henchman's son, had just come home from prison. Barely 2 weeks later, he was dead, shot down in cold blood in the middle of the Bronx. The hit was precise, deliberate, and heartless. Whoever set it up had studied his every move. First, they missed him once. Then, determined not to fail, they tracked down his lawyer, pretending to be a friend of a mutual associate named Biggie. That fake connection convinced Lodi he had support waiting for him now that he was free. He agreed to the meetup, but that decision cost him his life. The streets knew immediately what this was. The same man who had once humiliated Henchman's son had just been taken out. Cops treated the murder as unsolved, but everybody outside the courtroom already knew the truth. And while detectives were still digging into Lodi Mack's death, Henchman's world started crumbling in other ways. By 2010, he caught another massive case, all this time for money laundering, proving the empire he built was starting to collapse from all sides. Witness tampering, drug trafficking, murder, the works. Prosecutors painted Jimmy Henchman as more than just a hustler. They claimed he was running an empire, pulling in over $11 million a year off the drug game while playing power broker in the music industry. But eventually, the walls closed in. Henchman was convicted and slammed with not one, but 2 life sentences. One for the massive drug operation and another tied to the murder of Lodi Mack. That chapter sealed his fate, but Henchman wasn't the only deadly rival in 50 Cent's story. Another name stands just as infamous: Kenneth Supreme McGriff. And this beef? This is the one that left 50 riddled with 9 bullets and nearly dead. To understand it, you gotta rewind to the early 1980s. That's when Supreme built his empire, the Supreme Team, a ruthless crew based out of Jamaica, Queens. Under his leadership, they weren't just another gang, they were a full-on criminal organization. With hundreds of members, they ran the crack game in the Baisley Park projects where Supreme grew up, and were pulling in around $200,000 a day. The streets were theirs, but no king rules forever. In 1987, Supreme's reign was cut short when he got hit with a 12-year sentence. He made parole in '94, but couldn't stay out of trouble, landing back inside within a year. Finally, by 1997, he managed to get free and clear his name. This time, he decided to flip the script, moving into the music business. That's when he linked up with Ja Rule and the Murder Inc. crew, quickly becoming one of their muscle men, offering protection, power, and a heavy dose of fear to anyone who crossed them. At first, Supreme and 50 Cent were on decent terms. Back then, 50 wasn't the superstar we know now. His career was still grinding in the shadows, nowhere near Ja Rule's level of fame. Money was tight, so 50 did what he does best, stir the pot. He dropped How to Rob, a track that clowned nearly the entire rap game just to get noticed. And it worked. His name was buzzing. But soon after came the infamous beef with Ja Rule. Supreme tried stepping in as the big homie, telling 50 to ease up and let it go. But if you know 50, you know he doesn't back down for anyone. Ignoring Supreme's warning only added fuel to the fire, and it put him on Premier's radar in a dangerous way. Then in '99, tragedy struck close to both camps. Their mutual friend, Black Just, got caught in the crossfire of some street drama. The story goes like this. E-Money Bags had put money down on a car from Supreme, but when he asked for the cash back, Premi brushed him off and laughed it off like it was nothing. E wasn't having it. Things escalated and he ended up spraying shots at Supreme while he was riding with Black Just. And Black Just took 2 bullets, one to the thigh. A hospital was nearby, but instead of rushing there, Supreme drove back to the block and had someone else take Just for help. That delay cost Black Just his life. And with his death, E-Money Bags had made enemies he couldn't afford. Enemies with reach, money, and revenge on their minds. From that point on, things between Supreme and 50 went downhill at full speed, all thanks to the Ja Rule situation. Tony Yayo once told a story about the time Supreme tried to press 50, and instead of backing down, 50 made it clear he wasn't scared of anybody. That only made the tension worse. To add fuel to the fire, 50 started hanging heavy with E-Money Bags, Big Nose Troy, and Green-Eyed Born, all guys who were already enemies of Supreme. That move alone had the streets buzzing. 50 was picking sides and not the safe ones. The breaking point came with the song Ghetto Quran. When it leaked, Supreme heard his name in the lyrics and lost it. Now 50 claimed he was only paying homage, the same way other rappers had mentioned the Supreme team before him, but Premi wasn't buying that excuse for a second. To him, those bars sounded more like someone airing out street business that wasn't supposed to be touched. Then things got even crazier. Not long after, someone tried to take Supreme out at a gas station. He survived, but in his mind, the culprit was already clear. He believed 50 had a hand in it. That was the final straw. From that moment, Premi allegedly put a bounty on 50's head. Word is he hired Daryl, Homicide Bomb, Mike Tyson's former bodyguard, to handle the hit. And on May 24, 2000, as 50 was leaving his grandmother's house in Queens, the streets came for him. 50's young son was playing in the yard at his grandmother's house that day, completely unaware of what was about to go down. As 50 slid into the back seat of a car, another vehicle crept up. The shooter stepped out, walked right up to the window and unleashed a barrage. 9 shots from a 9mm. Bullets ripped through him, say his hand, arm, legs, hip, chest, even his face. Just inches higher, and he would have been gone forever, but somehow, against all odds, he survived. 3 brutal weeks in the hospital, multiple surgeries, and when the dust cleared, 50 walked out breathing. The streets couldn't believe it. The man was literally bulletproof now, and the legend of his survival became one of the most famous stories in hip-hop history. 3 years later, when he dropped Many Men, 50 pointed fingers, naming Daryl Homicide Baum, known as Homo, as the shooter. But by the time the track hit, karma had already spun back around. Homo was dead, killed just weeks after the attempt on 50's life. The cycle of violence kept turning, but 50 was still here, scarred, but alive and about to flip his pain into power. In the end, the law closed in on Supreme. By 2002, he was arrested on a murder charge, and just a year later, the feds had Murder Inc. under a microscope. By 2005, Irv Gotti himself was standing trial, accused of laundering drug money for Preem. Irv managed to walk free after beating the case, but Supreme wasn't nearly as lucky. The evidence stacked against him was devastating. Testimony from a hitman, text messages, and surveillance footage all tied him directly to paying $50,000 for multiple hits, including the one on 50 Cent. Once the truth unraveled, his empire crumbled piece by piece. All his assets were seized, and the man who once ran Queens couldn't even afford his own lawyer. He was forced to rely on a court-appointed attorney, a fall from power that showed just how far he'd fallen. On April 9th, 2007, Kenneth Supreme McGriff, the same man who once ran the Supreme Team like a king, was sentenced to life in prison. The street legend was gone, locked away forever, while 50 Cent's legend only grew bigger with every passing year.